Hi there, I'm Professor Blackmore, and welcome back to my channel. Now today, I want to talk to you about even further developments surrounding the Alec Baldwin shooting on the set of the movie Rust in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And while there's still no word on any criminal charges, there have been non-stop developments in this case since this unfortunate event occurred on October the 21st, 2021, resulting in the death of director of photography Halyna Hutchins after she was shot by Alec Baldwin on that movie set. And as you know, Halyna Hutchins was killed and director Joel Souza was injured when Alec Baldwin fired a gun on the set, causing a live bullet projectile to strike Halyna and to exit her body, entering the body of director Joel Souza, causing him to suffer some serious gunshot injuries. Now, in my last update, I talked to you about a very interesting lawsuit filed by the armorer against the supplier of ammunition used on the set that was thought to be dummy rounds. And I encourage you to go back and watch my preview of that interesting development, wherein I go over at least 7 interesting details, including one of the most jaw-dropping things revealed in that lawsuit, which was the armorer's allegation that immediately after the shooting, it was discovered that there were other live rounds in the box of rounds that everybody on the set thought were dummy rounds. And also that when the sheriff arrived on the scene, he discovered that there were another 7 live rounds in that box of so-called dummy rounds. And so today, I want to talk to you about the lawsuit we all knew would be filed, and that is the wrongful death lawsuit that was just filed by the estate of Halyna Hutchins and her surviving husband and son. And now, just right off the bat, when you look at this list of defendants, you can see that they sued the corporate entity movie production company that Alec Baldwin created to produce the Rust movie, which would have been created to protect Alec Baldwin from personal liability. But they also sued Alec Baldwin in his personal capacity as well. So that would be the source of one of the initial motions filed by the attorneys retained by the insurance carrier for the movie production company entity and the attorneys representing Alec Baldwin individually in his personal capacity. And now I could be wrong about this, and maybe my mind will be changed by some other shocking development that may occur in the future. But based on developments revealed in the armorer's lawsuit, I'm most interested in 3 defendants in this lawsuit, and they are Sarah Zachary, Seth Kinney, and PDQ Arm and Prop LLC. Now, right off the bat, I'll say they'll use at least 10 of these 100 does very quickly. Because if you watch my last preview video on this topic, you'll remember that the armorer's lawsuit against the ammunition supplier, Seth Kinney, and PDQ Arm and Prop revealed that there was another young 19-year-old woman working in the prop department named Nicole, who is not listed as one of the named defendants in this lawsuit. And if she had been named, then I would have said I'm most interested in 4 rather than 3 defendants, because I think that however those live rounds got on the set, it'll have something to do with one or more of these 4 defendants. Now, clearly, the armorer and Alec Baldwin have a high level of negligent activity for their roles, respectively, in causing the live rounds to be placed in the gun, i.e. by the armorer, and the firing of the gun, i.e. by Alec Baldwin. But everybody on the set expected that there would not be any live rounds on the set. So the top line liability and maybe even criminal culpability, in my opinion, has to go to the person or persons who caused those live rounds to be on the set in the first place. Now, irrespective of the relationship that Alec Baldwin thought he developed with Halyna Hutchins' husband soon after the incident, they're going after him hard in this lawsuit. And the plaintiff's attorney used a legal term of art that we call the but-for standard, stating that notwithstanding the negligent acts of many other named defendants in the case, that but for Alec Baldwin's actual handling of the gun, Halyna Hutchins would not be dead. And so regarding the contents of the lawsuit, in my opinion, it's not as interesting as the lawsuit filed by the armorer's attorney. And I feel that some of the factual allegations will need to be cleaned up. But it is a very general pleading, which is what you usually see being filed, which is why I was so surprisingly impressed by the theory of the case so meticulously laid out by the armorer's attorney. And now, this might be the first time I've seen this technique, but the lawsuit has its own movie trailer. That's right, you heard me correctly. The attorneys for the plaintiffs in this case have also released a corresponding video recreation of the events leading up to the shooting. And even though it appears the lawsuit movie trailer seems to provide a little more detail than the lawsuit itself, in my opinion, the production quality is less than that of portions of Alec Baldwin's interview with George Stephanopoulos, and it's less interesting than the lawsuit filed by the armorer. Maybe the idea was to avoid some of the criticism that ABC received because of the movie-like, very slick production quality and appearance of the George Stephanopoulos interview of Alec Baldwin. But I found the lawsuit movie trailer to be very dry and boring. Irrespective, it seems that the purpose of it is to answer back to some of the outlandish things that Alec Baldwin said in his ABC interview with George Stephanopoulos. Now, I would encourage you to view my video detailing my reactions to the George Stephanopoulos interview of Alec Baldwin, and I would encourage you to actually watch the interview if you haven't already done so, because while Alec Baldwin says some completely outrageous things, he was clearly previewing his theory of the case. Now, in Alec Baldwin's George Stephanopoulos interview, he stated that he was not made aware of any of the safety issues on the set. The lawsuit movie trailer alleges that the crew had warned the production that the set was super unsafe and that safety was a massive issue. Now, some might say that if Alec Baldwin didn't know this, he should have known because of his leadership role on the set. But it's going to be pretty important to know if he actually knew. And I think the facts are probably going to bear out that he did not know about any of these safety issues on the set. And if you'll remember my review of the armorer's lawsuit, you'll remember that one of the accidental discharges was committed by the prop manager, Sarah Zachary, and the armorer states in her lawsuit that she was directly admonished by the ammunition supplier, Seth Kinney, not to report that incident to the production management team. None of the allegations in this lawsuit or the lawsuit trailer specifically indicate that Alec Baldwin personally and directly knew about any allegations of unsafe conditions on the set. So that's going to be very important. You have a lot of statements about the production and what the production knew, but it doesn't actually ever state that any of this information was provided directly to Alec Baldwin, and that's going to be critical at the time of trial. In addition, the lawsuit movie trailer reflects emails and text message communications, but none of them were sent from or to Alec Baldwin personally. And so the lawsuit movie trailer also alleges that Alec Baldwin was required to accept the revolver directly from the armorer. And so I don't know how that will be resolved because there were deviations from standards taking place everywhere at that time due to COVID-19. And the armorer states in her lawsuit that she was not able to remain on the set once she arrived with the gun, and when she arrived, Alec Baldwin was not there. And so because he was not there and because there were restrictions on how many people could be present, she was asked to leave. Now, in my opinion, she should have taken the weapon back, but she was instructed by the assistant director to leave the gun with him. So when she requested that the assistant director let her know when Alec Baldwin returned so that she could personally hand the gun to him, the assistant director failed to abide by this request, and he handed the gun to Alec Baldwin himself. And so in addition to modifications to procedures due to COVID-19, they're saying that Alec Baldwin should have circumvented the duties of people hired by the production company to carry out certain duties. And while carrying out his role as actor, conduct the role of those other individuals as well. And I just don't know if that heightened level would be expected of an actual actor on the set of a movie, irrespective of his leadership role. Now, in addition, the lawsuit movie trailer notes differences from live rounds and what they call typical dummy rounds, which leads me to believe that everybody is having doubt about whether the so-called dummy rounds on the set supplied by Seth Kenney and PDQ Arm and Prop were actually typical dummy rounds. And so the lawsuit movie trailer asserts that when you shake a dummy round, you hear a BB rattle, but when you shake a live bullet, you do not hear anything. The plaintiffs assert that Alec Baldwin himself should have checked each round before they were placed in the gun by the armorer. The armorer's lawsuit against the ammunition supplier indicates that she checked each round before she loaded them into the gun. But if you reviewed my review of her lawsuit, you'll remember that it was revealed that Seth Kenney was in the practice of using a brand of casings that could be repurposed from live to dummy rounds and from dummy rounds to live rounds. So it is my opinion that there was probably some gunpowder left in those so-called dummy rounds, and you could possibly shake them and hear the BB rattling without also being able to discern whether there was any gunpowder also inside if there was a minuscule amount left inside of those casings. And so the question is, could a small minuscule amount of gunpowder cause such a fatal accident? And it's just another fact that remains to be seen. Now, these last few things revealed in the lawsuit movie trailer address those jaw-dropping statements made by Alec Baldwin in his George Stephanopoulos interview. Number one, that he did not pull the trigger, and number two, that Halyna Hutchins told him to cock the gun and point it in her direction and the direction of others on the set. Now, the lawsuit movie trailer provides an explanation from an expert of what very likely happened. And I hope you'll also review my video reactions to the George Stephanopoulos interview, wherein I provide my full opinion of Alec Baldwin's "I didn't pull the trigger" theory. Now, I believe this statement was made by Alec Baldwin for the ignorance value to affect the decision making in the criminal case, to take this out of the purview of recklessness committed by Alec Baldwin, to make it seem as if he's too ignorant to have known that what he was doing was so reckless. But at that time, I showed you how sensitive the mechanics of a single action firearm are. And once you pull the hammer back, any slight action near that trigger could cause it to move backward, causing the gun to fire. And while there were portions of the lawsuit movie trailer towards the end that finally reflect Alec Baldwin's finger closer to the trigger, it is interesting how there are many portions in that trailer that reflect Alec Baldwin's finger completely away from the trigger when he had the gun cocked back, which is more consistent with what Alec Baldwin stated in his George Stephanopoulos interview. And it's inconsistent with the expert's explanation, which would be more consistent with Alec Baldwin's finger being closer to the trigger. And as you can see later on in the movie trailer, when it talks about the expert's explanation of what occurred, it shows Alec Baldwin's finger on the trigger of the gun. So I personally would have provided a more consistent picture throughout the movie trailer, reflecting Alec Baldwin's finger closer to the trigger. Now, while most people were shocked by Alec Baldwin saying in his George Stephanopoulos interview that he did not pull the trigger, in my opinion, even more staggering than that was him saying, in essence, that he was directed by Halyna Hutchins to take every action that he took that led up to his shooting of her. And so the lawsuit movie trailer attempts to answer this by asserting that the industry standards required that Alec Baldwin ensure that any crew in the line of fire had protective glass or other protective equipment, and the camera should have been operated remotely if Alec Baldwin would be aiming the gun at the camera. But based on Alec Baldwin's theory laid out in his George Stephanopoulos interview, if the theory of the attorney for Halyna Hutchins' estate is that but for Alec Baldwin's action in handling the gun, that Halyna Hutchins would not be dead, Alec Baldwin would be saying, on the contrary, that he would never have carried out those actions but for being directed to do so by the decedent herself, and that it would not be his area of expertise to require the director of photography to use a remote camera at any point in the production process, because she was hired to provide that level of expertise required to know what type of protection equipment was required in her camera area and to determine whether she should be using a remote camera or not. And between those two individuals, that this would have been more in the purview of the deceased area of expertise, more so than Alec Baldwin. So I'm not really impressed by this lawsuit filed by the estate of Halyna Hutchins, nor am I impressed by the lawsuit movie trailer, because it does not necessarily provide that clapback level response to Alec Baldwin's theory of the case that he laid out in his interview with George Stephanopoulos. Now, while I'll agree that many of the actions of Alec Baldwin were negligent, so were the actions of many people on the set, including the deceased Halyna Hutchins. And so if it is true that there may be testimony and evidence that will establish that Halyna Hutchins actually did instruct and direct Alec Baldwin to carry out each action that led up to the shooting, including the cocking back of the hammer and the directionality of the pointing of the gun, how can we draw a straight causal line to Alec Baldwin's actions being the but-for cause when he's going to say that he carried out every one of those actions because the deceased Halyna Hutchins instructed him to do so? And so the lawsuit movie trailer does not provide any answer for this at all. So at this point, the two things that I'm looking for are Alec Baldwin's motion to strike the suit against him in his individual capacity, and then I'd be looking to see how Alec Baldwin will try to attack the causation element by attempting to assert that the event was caused by the actions in part by the decedent herself. Now, if Alec Baldwin does remain a party defendant in this case, clearly this case will most likely settle out of court as it relates to him and the Rust Movie Production Company entities. And there is no doubt that a jury would find liability on the part of the Rust Movie Production Company. And if Alec Baldwin remains a party defendant, it will be interesting to see if his attorneys would assert any comparative fault on the part of Halyna Hutchins at the time of trial. In addition, we're still waiting to see if any criminal charges will be filed against any of the players, because I really believe the top line criminal culpability and civil liability comes down to the live rounds on the set. Everybody's looking at Alec Baldwin and the Rust Movie Production Company party defendants because they're the ones with the deepest pockets. But this really all comes down to how live rounds made it on the set when the production company understood that the ammunition it was purchasing was to be only dummy round ammunition? What do you think? Who do you think bears the most responsibility in this case? Please let me know by leaving your comments in the comment section below. And until next time, I hope you'll consider giving me a big thumbs up. And please also subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the bell so you'll be notified whenever I post new videos on this topic. And please also follow me on TikTok and Instagram.